Hello, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and today we're talking about the bad guys, because in Matthew 26, starting in verse 3, the biggest bad guys in the story of Matthew are now on screen. Well, not the biggest. Okay, Lucifer, Lord of Darkness, who shows up in Matthew chapter 4, is probably the biggest bad guy of Matthew because of how he's Lucifer, Lord of Darkness, and the almost eternal spiritual enemy of God, trying to thwart all of his redemptive plans and advance the exact opposite of the kingdom and the kingdom. Okay, so I'm going to give Lucifer top billing, but top human billing is going to be Caiaphas and the chief priests of the religious establishment. And you can tell they're bad because they're the ones who want to murder people. Jesus has been talking about all of this life stuff and values of the kingdom and turn the other cheek and all of that business. And that is the fruit that his kingdom values are producing in people, the fruit that, or the yeast that the Pharisees are spreading around subversively through things, that the religious leadership are spreading around subversively through things, culminates in them being like, other people are just so wrong religiously, they just have to be killed, particularly this guy. But the interesting thing about good writing and good storytelling is that it almost always has a good bad guy. And by good bad guy, I mean a bad guy who thinks they're good. A bad guy who thinks they are doing the right and moral thing and that they have to bear this difficult, regrettable, heavy burden, but alas, it falls to them to do what no one else has the courage to do. For example, Thanos thought he was the good guy, and that's why he was a spectacularly interesting bad guy that carried along an entire movie franchise for however many films, because that complex bad guy archetype sets us up for action. It's true. That person is willing to do things that most of us from a distance would view as being highly morally compromised. And usually that kind of bad guy has their head so far up their own thought bubble that they can't think straight anymore. They're in an echo chamber. They have run a complex moral equation that wouldn't make sense if you just flew aliens in from outer space and had them look at it. But man, it makes perfect sense to them, and they are going to do what they have to do. But the more you can empathize with that and understand that, the more the actions of the antagonist and the protagonist and the people surrounding it, the more the plot beats and rhythm of the story and themes of the story are all going to make sense. So at several points, as we've been processing the book of Matthew, we've taken days here or there to try to see this thing from the perspective of the people who don't like Jesus, to try to be empathetic, to try to understand whatever morally positive things the bad guys might imagine in their minds that they are doing. But so far, it's all just been chatter, what seems like impotent threats or mumblings about, we got to get rid of this guy. Now it's getting to the place where the people who actually have the capacity, they actually are positioned politically and socially to have Jesus murdered, have decided we're going to have Jesus murdered, and they are down to the finest details of the plot that they are clearly ready to execute. This is what we're looking at in Matthew 26. The chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they plotted to arrest Jesus in some sly way and kill him, but not during the feast, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. The feast there refers to the Passover, followed immediately by the Feast of Unleavened Bread that we talked a little bit about the other day. So who's Caiaphas, and what's running through this guy's head that would cause him to say, wow, I am the religious leader of these people, and my job is to point the way to God and the virtues of God, and the best way to achieve the things that are my responsibility would be to manipulate the government into publicly murdering a homeless guy who's never physically harmed anyone through state-sponsored public execution. Something went wrong in this guy's brain. What are the pressures he's feeling? And to best answer that question, I think we're most served to go way back into the early days of the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, and this is what we see. Way back in Genesis, God picks a guy named Abram. Eventually his name becomes Abraham out of the clear blue sky and is like, I'm going to make a covenant with you. It's unconditional. This covenant says that I'm going to be your God and you're going to be the father of a great people. And I'm going to bless you. And also the nations are going to be blessed through you. This sets up the whole trajectory of the idea of the redemptive plan, the advent of the kingdom that we're looking at here in Matthew, coming through this particular people group. This is the story that Jesus is the culmination of. Well, it seems like Abraham's not going to have any kids because he's old, but then he ends up having kids. And in particular, he has a kid named Isaac. Isaac has a kid named Jacob. Jacob has a whole bunch of kids. Jacob's name gets changed to Israel because there's just a lot of name changes along the way back then. And Jacob has a lot of kids with some different ladies. So his first wife's name is Leah, and he has 6 kids with her: Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Reuben, and then Judah. Did I get that right? 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's right. And then Jacob has a couple of kids with Leah's maidservant. Weird story for another time. Their names are Gad and Asher. So now we got, 8. And then Jacob's got another wife named Rachel, and her maidservant also ends up having a couple of kids with Jacob, and their names are Dan and Naphtali. So that takes us up to 10 of these descendants of Jacob. And then Rachel, Jacob's second wife, all of this is like 2000 BC, by the way, according to the Bible timeline. Rachel, Jacob's second wife, has 2 sons, Benjamin and Joseph. So that's 11, 12. Okay, and then the math works out here. These kids or their descendants become the 12 tribes of Israel. Of those first 6 kids with Leah, Issachar, Zebulun, Simeon, Reuben, Judah, and Levi, 5 of those are viewed as the patriarchs of tribes. There are tribes of Israel named after those 5 guys. Levi doesn't get one. We'll talk about why in a minute. So there's 5 tribes. Then Gad and Asher both have tribes named after them. There's 7. Then Dan and Naphtali both have tribes named after them. There's 9. Then Benjamin has a tribe named after him. That's 10. Joseph does not have a tribe named after him, but 2 of his descendants, his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, both are half tribes, and that's how you get to 12 total tribes. Sometimes they're lumped together as like the descendants of Joseph, but usually you'll see Manasseh and Ephraim described as their own tribes. So you got 12 tribes of Israel, but poor Levi got nothing. Well, Levi, it turns out, didn't actually get nothing. Levi is not given any area of land like those other 12 tribal leaders or tribal families are given. Levi has his descendants distributed among all the lands, and the Levites' job is to serve in this priestly role, including the high priestly role. So they perform sacrifices. They serve as the go-between between humanity, God's chosen people, and God. And they are descended from a priestly tradition that even predates the existence of their priestly tribe, that goes way, way back into the early days of Genesis. And in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, I'm flipping over there now because I haven't looked at Hebrews for a little while. Chapter 5. We get a little more fleshing out of the high priestly role that goes back to even before the time of Levi and the Levites, all the way back to Melchizedek, who's like super, super early in the whole historical game of the Old Testament. And then the idea of the book of Hebrews, or this part of the book of Hebrews, is that this go-between role the priest plays between God and man is fulfilled. Jesus is the completion of that role, and that he is the perfect high priest, the ultimate go-between. And so what the book of Hebrews then is effectively saying is that Jesus displaces the very people who had him murdered, people like Caiaphas, who were not serving properly in their priestly roles and are now a moot point anyway, because Jesus is the ultimate high priest. I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit here. Well, as the Old Testament unfolds, as you and I have discussed at length, there's all kinds of political changes, military changes, the lines get drawn differently, and the role of high priest, and particularly how the priests and high priests are selected, that evolves over time as well. And we are going to, should I finish it now? Nah, we'll just pick up where we left off tomorrow so I can give it proper time because, I mean, you want a fleshed out bad guy, right? The story makes more sense with a fleshed out bad guy. And if we're talking about Caiaphas, this is a bad guy who has got millennia of pressure on his shoulders that he feels, even if he feels it in a misguided way. There is a lot riding on him, more than probably most of us involved in this conversation have ever felt. And hopefully we can be, if obviously not in agreement with him, at least empathetic to why he's acting the way he's acting and where he's coming from if we spend a little more time thinking about this story. All right, we'll pick up where we left off mañana. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for being empathetic and putting in the extra effort to understand the history and the backstory on this stuff. I think it's making it richer for me. Hopefully it is for you as well. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.